Okay. All right. So yeah, this is it. The introduction is pretty much over. Now we would like to introduce Dr. Kent Riley. Kent, if you want, you can unmute and start your video. There you are. Hi, Kent. All right, so Dr. Kent Riley is a historian and iconographer, very well versed in archaeology, who received his PhD from University of Texas at Austin. His mentor was Linda Shealy, and he is a specialist of Olmec and Mississippian civilizations, and has been active in the field for a very long time. Is professor of anthropology at Texas State University. And so now we will disappear. And next time someone appears on our end, it's going to be David Freidel. In the meantime, you have about 18 minutes, Kent, for introducing and explaining to everyone present why David is someone we would want to honor with our Lifetime Achievement Award.
Hold on.
Okay, okay.
Okay. I want to put my money where my mouth is. I want to talk to you about making a donation.
Okay.
To what you do, and we'll have to get together at some point. And I've been so impressed with what you were saying, your boring presentation, that I want to reward you for that. So congratulations.
Your words are beautiful. Thank you so much, Kent.
You're quite welcome.
All right, so go ahead.
Ready?
Yeah, we're ready. So we're gonna disappear, and you're gonna be soloing this, and then if you're still talking past 7 Eastern time, we'll cut you. I'm joking, we won't, but we'll kind of intrude. So please go ahead, and the floor is yours, Ken. Thank you, everyone, for being here.
Thank you, Kent.
Thank you. It is a great pleasure to be here, and I want to thank the organizers at Davidson College for putting this together. It is really a reward for me to be able to talk about David Freidel. I don't know how many of you know that he was actually born in Washington, D.C. And also that not only did David get his degree from Harvard, his father was a Harvard professor. He wrote a very important biography of Franklin Roosevelt, and he was a specialist in the late 19th, early 20th century American history. He practices what I call indigenous archaeology. He objects to a growing trend amongst archaeology to be more concerned about how the Maya made their living than about what they might have thought about what it was worthwhile to live for. And David has always been working on that particular issue. He has worked primarily at the sites of Cozumel for his dissertation, Cerros in Belize, Yaxuna in Yucatan, and El Peru Waka, the big urban area in town. I want to say that David started working with Linda Shealy in what I consider one of the golden ages of Maya archaeology. It's the age when epigraphers, art historians, and archaeologists began to go into the field together. And all sorts of things were revealed when they worked together. Some of the materials that came out of this collaboration of these different scholars was A Forest of Kings and Maya Cosmos, and many articles. Now, beginning with Cerros in Belize, all sorts of the speakers at the conference actually got some of their basic training there working at Cerros. I'm thinking in particular of Jim Garber and Jaime Awe. They both started their archaeological careers at that site. I know that Kathy Reese Taylor worked under David in several sites, and Cat Brown certainly worked with David in Belize. We can say that David's efforts at revealing a type of Maya, a Maya who interacted with all sorts of peoples in Mesoamerica, has made an enormous progress in terms of our understanding of the interaction of Native Americans in Mesoamerica. And many of the techniques developed in Mesoamerica are being used in North America to understand the different tribal associations there. I would also say that David has been instrumental in getting the public involved in Maya archaeology, partially through his work with Linda Shealy, but partially on his own ability to speak. You know, how can I say this? You should have been there the night they dropped his slide tray at the University of Texas. That was quite an occurrence. It had us all laughing. Okay. And I can say personally that David has meant so much to my work and to my understanding of the Maya that I've been able to collaborate with him on a couple of articles, and I hope to do more work in the future. I would say in closing that David has taught me that Maya craftsmen created objects that were ritually animated and embodied aspects of the sacred and visualized episodes in a creation narrative. These objects and landscapes, thank you, archaeologist, and the layout of the Maya sites that he has excavated serve to define these sites as both the axis of the physical world and the cosmos of an extra physical reality. Thank you, David, for these gifts to us. And thank you in particular for the gift of your understanding and help with my work. I might say there's only one thing that David can improve on: his taste in bourbon. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kent. This was great. If you wanted, I think we have 10 minutes before we need to go on. So what I'd like to propose is to introduce David now, and maybe the two of you can chat a bit for 10 minutes about your collaborations. Does that sound okay to you?
That sounds fine.
Okay, great. All right. So, all right. Hi, everyone, again. And here is Dr. David Freidel. Welcome. And so the two of you go ahead and you should chat. Just you got 10 minutes.
Just to set the record straight on bourbon, my ancestor, Elijah Craig, was a Baptist preacher who left Eastern Virginia to go to Western Virginia, where he could practice his trade. And he had a side business of barrel making. He made barrels, and he cauterized the barrels when they came back to him from downriver, because he sent them full of clear liquid from Bourbon County and adjacent areas to New Orleans. And by the time they got to New Orleans, they were golden brown. And the people in New Orleans said, "Send us more of that stuff from Bourbon County, I think it is."
Yes.
So Elijah Craig's name is attached to a good bourbon, but Kent, you've always guided me very well in this, you and Michael. And so I will certainly defer when it comes to your taste in bourbon. And I look forward to drinking it in your abode in the near future at some time. But thank you so much for your kind words. And it is a great pleasure to collaborate with you. It's always inspiring to me. And it's been a wonderful journey that we've had together over these many years now. working with promising students and rising stars and a lot of people in the field who are still active and will continue to be long after us. But I would like to salute you and Jim Garber for your publications on Eastern North American cosmology, symbolism, and iconography. I think they've shaped the field in a very productive and positive way. And for those of you who don't know, I've just finished an article honoring Kent, in which I talk about the Maya and the Teotihuacanos and the Mississippian culture all at once in a way that I hope is not only audacious, but hopefully entertaining. We'll see when he gets a chance to actually read it.
Well, for those of you who don't know, David and I are distantly related. It's true.
It's true.
Yeah, it's true. And so we constantly have discussions about good bourbon. But let's talk about mirror bowls for a second. David,
Sure.
you're going into that immediately when you start your talk. The concepts of mirror bowls seems to be there at the beginning of Mesoamerican culture, and it's still there today. And it's incredibly important in terms of the understanding of the oracular nature of Mesoamerican religion.
Well, I certainly will talk about that a little bit tonight, and I'll attribute to you ideas regarding the mirror bowl. I was introduced to the idea principally through the work of Carl Taube, who wrote a seminal article in 1983 on the Spider Woman of Teotihuacan, in which he illustrated mirror bowls, which are bowls that are shown in profile, but they have mirrors standing on them if they're sometimes illustrated. There's examples of this from several places, including Highland Guatemala and Teotihuacan. The notion of a mirror bowl is that you can scree by looking at the surface of water on a mirror that is formed in a bowl and cast kernels of corn or other materials into the water. But I think that these divining plates were used dry as well as full of water, and that, as Carl Taube pointed out, there's at least one from Highland Guatemala from the site of Neba that has a mirror inside the bowl. It's an iron ore mosaic mirror on a slate back that's placed inside the bowl. So that is a literal example. But the idea of the mirror bowl and conversation, Ken and I have discerned that this is an idea that's in the Olmec, and especially at the site of La Venta. Ken has argued for a long time with me that Group A at La Venta represents a pond, a place that water would accumulate on the surface, and that it had symbolically underneath it layers of greenstone that would represent that water as well, and that would represent a mirror bowl, and that this idea is also represented iconographically, as I'll suggest in my presentation tonight. So it's one of the connections that we're trying to make. The notion of oracle, I think, is really important. John Dee, court magician to Elizabeth I, and a recent article in Antiquity magazine is shown to have had a set of screeing mirrors, black obsidian mirrors from Highland, Mexico. And he used those for the purposes in which they were designed, namely for looking into the mirrors and seeing things. The notion of mirrors as portals, well articulated by Carl Taube over many decades of scholarship, and certainly is being pursued by me and my others in Mesoamerican studies as we speak. But I do think it's important that the kinds of ideas that I'll be talking about tonight are firmly anchored in the Middle Preclassic period, if not much earlier, but certainly articulated in the Middle Preclassic iconographically and artifactually in ways that I think are quite incontrovertible, and they are anchored in many respects in the scholarship of Kent Riley in his PhD dissertation, his master's thesis, and articles that he's produced over the years, showing these connections between the Olmec era and later periods of time, especially in the Maya area. So having introduced Kent Riley, I think he's ready to give you a present. No, not going to happen. Huh? I can't finesse you this one. Okay.
All right. So thank you so much, Kent, for your time and for the introduction. And I hope you're going to stay with us for most of the conference, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Kent.
I'm going to do my best, and you may have to let us know how to sign on for day 2.
Yeah, you just go to the that's a good question and a good moment to ask. You just go to our website, goafar.org, or you can just Google Maya at the Lago, and you'll get there, and then you click on either about the conference or program, and both of these have a special webinar Zoom link for each day. So for day 2, you would click to the day 2 link, and then you'll end up at the conference. I'm sure Adam can help you too if you need.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Ken. And so if you want to disappear, we'll say goodbye to you.
What if I want to stay?
Well, you can stay. You can just stop video and mute, and you'll still be able to see the conference. You'll just won't be showing, won't be appearing to the attendees.
Okay,
So,
you got it, Superman. Let's go.
Bye-bye, Kent. Thank you. All right, so excellent. All right, so the floor is yours, and thank you everyone for being here. And now I give the floor to Dr. David Freidel, and so I'll start your presentation for you right here to share, simplify things. Here we go. And so Dr. Freidel's presentation is entitled "The Materiality of Majesty." Sorry, the paper crown and the segmented crown, images, context, and artifacts. All right. Here we go. You can use these arrows here or the mouse.
Thank you very much, Max. Thank you very much, Matt. Thank you very much, everybody, for this remarkable honor. I've thought about this presentation, and I hope that I can articulate my ideas coherently. They have been evolving over the course of my preparation for it. The object on the screen right now is a boulder jade, probably from the Copan area. It was unprovenanced, but it was in the Lords of Creation show organized by Virginia Miller and Dory Rents-Boudet, Ginny Fields, excuse me, and Dory Rents-Boudet. And I've been studying this jade for some time because on the top of it, it has a foliated how. And the foliated how, as articulated by David Stewart in his paper in 2012 on the name of paper, is a version of the 3-leaf paper, which he regards as the essential name of the jester god, the crown of the Maya that Linda Sheely first talked about in the 1970s. So Ush-Yop-Hun is the name of that foliated how in his view, and I think he's probably correct. But below this foliated how version of the jester god is another crown. And that crown is a segmented crown. It has actually 4 segments, but you can see 3 of them here. And the segmented crown is an idea that, in fact, does not occur in David's paper and it doesn't occur in epigraphy yet, but I hope it will be introduced by me and others will start to think about this. What I'm going to propose tonight is this, that the foliated how, the Ush-Yop-Hun 3-leaf paper is the paper crown, as David proposes, that is placed on the head of a person when that person is transformed into a king, into a queen, into a holy lord. So it's the accession symbol, the paper crown. But it's not paper because people wrote on paper, although they did. It's paper because people were wrapped in paper when they were dead, when they were bundled, and when they were curated, not in the ground necessarily, but in carnal houses or curation houses, bundle houses. And so I think that it represented the ruler as a living dead person, a person who had gone through the trials of death and resurrected, like the maize god, as represented, for example, at the site of San Bartolo on the west wall of the Pinturas shrine, which, as Carol Taube points out, is the Sistine Chapel of the Maya world, no question about it. But the segments on the crown then would not represent the paper. The segments in my hypothesis represent bones. They represent the bones inside of the bundles, and they are displayed on the outside in white polished shell curved elements that occur in actual royal crowns as worn by people, not all the time, but especially in the early classic. This particular jade boulder comes from that period, and you can see that the individual's holding his hands in a pose, and that pose is called the crab claw position. And what it does is it represents the cradling of the bundle. But the cradling of the bundle here is not performed. That is to say, there isn't a bundle in this man's hands. Alan Christensen, in an important contribution about San Martin, who is the god who dies and resurrects in the case of the people of Santiago Atitlan, the Atateco religion is a particularly coherent modern Maya religion. The Navasil here holds the bundle. You can see he's got the crab claw position and he's dancing the garments of San Martin, who is the god who dies and resurrects. He then stops and he puts those garments on himself and he dances as the crucified Christ resurrected, blessing the people in the congregation. And then he dances with his hands in the crab claw position, but there is no bundle. He is now the bundle. So I suggest that that boulder sculpture represents a Maya king of the early classic dancing as the bundle that he in fact represents. And that for kings to be kings, they had to be living dead people, and that they represented themselves as the living bundles themselves. So that's the big picture. I came to Maya on the Playa in 2013 at the invitation of Matt Saunders, and I had a wonderful time. There were a lot of great people there. Justin Kerr was there, and I had a chance to spend a lot of time with him. But I also had a chance to spend time with George Stewart. George Stewart had befriended me when I was 24 years old in 1971, when my research on Cozumel Island for my dissertation was sponsored by the National Geographic Society. So he's one of the people coming down to check on the project, the Harvard Arizona project. And he was very kind to me at that time. And when I said goodbye to him in 2013, he looked me directly in the eye, and I knew it was the last time I was going to see him. He said, "Goodbye, Don David." Don David was what I was called on the Cozumel project. Well, I met David when he was also working at Coba in that same general era. Of course, that's when he was beginning. David has inspired my career in many ways, but this article, The Name of Paper, The Mythology of Crowning Royal Nomenclature on Palenque's tablet, was a major inspiration to me, but he had a footnote in it in which he said he couldn't read Cache 1's jades from Cerros. They didn't read as royal jewels as far as he was concerned. So that inspired me to say, okay, I'm going to tell you why I think those are royal jades and why I think Jim Garber and Jaime Awe are right in discussing them as royal jades in their publications in the 2000s. David has three versions of the jester god here represented. The trident, which everybody calls the trefoil. He also refers to it as the blossom. I will refer to it as the trefoil. The Shok variant, which was discussed by Carl Taube in important publications, but is also another form of the diadem jewel, both in artifacts as shown here and in iconography. And then the main one, which is the Hun Avian form, Ush Yok Hun, 3-leaf paper, who is in fact, in David's proposal, he is not only a mate paper, but he represents the principal bird deity, or what we now call the great bird. And I think he's correct in this. And I'm going to talk about all 3 of these forms, but in the context of archaeological settings and royal jades that I have worked with in my career. So in the beginning, as Don David, this is how I looked when I met George on Cozumel Island. I was surveying there. George took me for a flight over Coba, where he was photographing it for National Geographic, which was great fun, but he of course went on to work at Coba. Jerry Sablos was the director of the Harvard Arizona project in 1972 when I was working as a surveyor there. This is us after a day's work. Paula Sabloff took this picture. I point out that David Mixter did his dissertation on the terminal classic, Aktun Khan, although he'll talk about the pre-classic here. And I had a lot of fun listening to him talk about Aktun Khan because I really liked the terminal classic archaeology, and I had a lot of experience with it at Cozumel as well. In the second field season at Cozumel, Bill Rathje was the director, here shown at the site. And we discovered in the course of that season, the San Gervasio segmented crown in a late classic grave in the main center of that city and the main center on Cozumel. When he saw this jade being worn by one of the project people on the site, he literally fell down on the ground. He just flopped onto the ground. He was so astonished. No one expects to find an Olmec masterpiece in dealing in the late terminal classic and post-classic area. But he did find this, and it's a trefoil, and it is a segmented crown with a trefoil. So the trefoil in the middle is a severed head from a Olmec diadem, carefully polished on the bottom. And then it has these shell segments which make up the crown's sides that I was talking about. And then it has diadem jewels made out of spondylus with the keen glyph, the glyph for the sun on them. Now, these documented items were probably actually early classic in their original form. There were early classic sherds in with the late classic pottery in this offering, in this grave. Alberto Ruz came and inspected the site as part of National Geographic's team. And he said, this must be the tomb of a looter, because he had materials from the Olmec, from the early classic, and from the late classic. But from my point of view, the importance here is it's a segmented crown with a trefoil jewel. As Kent Riley pointed out to me some time ago, the trefoil diadem, of course, Virginia Fields had said, is from the Olmec era, but not only is the trefoil middle pre-classic, but also the feathered mirror, which is, in my view, a variant form of the avian diadem jewel. And I corresponded yesterday with Carl Taube. He says, yeah, I think that's a pretty good idea. So I'm going to pursue this proposition that the great bird is represented, of course, as the sun and floats through the sky as a bird with feathers on it, and that this diadem is representative of that great bird. And the feathered mirror is also an oracular symbol, as Kent Riley was discussing it. Here is the bird's wing on the west wall at San Bartolo in the Pinturas building. And you can see the mirror in the middle of this wing, along with projectile points or spears coming off of it. And that, in fact, is something that Carl Taube's talked about, mirrors that have these spears coming off of them. But here's an example of the bird as that feathered mirror. But going back to the trefoil form, in addition to the San Gervasio form, is found on this effigy bundle with from the end of the middle preclassic, beginning of the late preclassic at Co by the team operating there, and also found on the Fuchsite mask in burial 85 at Tikal. Here's that effigy bundle, which is really cool because it's actually a censer. So it represents both cremation and the bundle. And bear in mind that most Maya were not, in fact, buried. They were bundled and kept in places until the bones were either incorporated into later cemeteries or burials, or they were burnt. They were cremated. Archaeologically, of course, at the North Acropolis at Tikal, inside the North Acropolis, they found burial 85, flanked by two other elaborate tombs. These are the late pre-classic royal family, I would say, of the site of Tikal. This is the platform, the accession platform, on which I had burial 85 underneath it. The scaffold throne that was on this was burnt, and then the remains of it were buried and sealed in a plaster cap adjacent to this particular scaffold platform. I think this was desecratory, but that's another story. What's important here is you have a bundled individual with relic bones taken from this individual, including the skull, but bundled, and then his bundle mask. So the bundle and the mask are not only in effigy at Ko, they're actually inside the tomb at Tikal in burial 85, and this mask represents a king. Simon Martin says he is the founder of dynasty, Yasheb Shok. I agree with that. I think that this is the case archaeologically. Now, the Hun Avian, or principal bird deity or great bird insignia, is discussed by David in his important paper as represented here on the back of the Dumbarton Oaks plaque. It's represented, in my view, in another illustration from his paper in the classic period. It's represented by the Altun Ha jade, according to Carl Taube. I think he's correct in that this is a scepter in the form of that great jester god, and it's probably represented in other images. David Stewart's argument, as given in his paper, is that this headdress of paper is personified. It's alive. It represents imminent power. So here on Stele 11 at Commonwealth, you see the bird descending, and then the bird is represented as this, diadem, which is ush yop hun, or three-leaf paper, and then the king becomes that bird. So the king is transformed in his mind into the messenger of the gods, the messenger of the creator. I think this is a very useful way of thinking about this diadem jewel. On the west wall at San Bartolo, the bird is being conjured out of the sky by the duck-billed conjurer. The bird lands on the tree that David identifies as the strangler fig, the tree that produces bark leaf, amate paper. And then in my hypothesis, I think it's shared by others, this is the maize god, and while he's obscured by the destruction of the mural, he's killing the bird. He's sacrificing the great bird, because you can see there's a little real bird on top of his tree, not this principal bird deity or great bird. Kent Riley suggested long ago that this kind of celt image from the Middle Pre-Classic represents the maize god ruler as a crocodile tree. You can see the legs are turning into the crocodile tree. And Jim Garber and Jaime Awe argued that this image that I'm showing you, this diadem jewel from Cache 1 at Cerros, represents death, represents the severed death head diadem. And I would suggest that they're not only correct, but that this diadem shows up on another jewel, which was found in burial 80 at El Peru Waka by Juan Carlos Perez and Griselda Perez. And it represents this crocodile tree with the jewel on top of it. But this is from the beginning of the 4th century AD. So it's an early classic example of this jewel. But Jim and Jaime have talked about this jewel in several presentations, and I'm kind of channeling parts of their presentations today. But you'll notice the sagittal crest on these individuals and the eyes that are bulging skeletal eyes. And I propose that this represents a monkey head. Jim showed that this occurred at the Olmec site of La Venta. There's an offering from La Venta, and it has the enlarged eye, it has the skeletal nose. It is a death head inside of a bowl. And that was important to them in their discussion of the middle preclassic origins of royal power in Cahopech in Belize, which we'll see later. But on Stela 25 at Izapa, Julia Guernsey discussed this very clearly. This is the great bird next to the crocodile tree. And you can see the hero has his arm torn off of it and is being grasped by the bird. And so the bird's about to be killed if you follow the Popol Vuh story. And that death image there is implied by this particular image. So at the site of El Peru Waka, Juan Carlos Perez worked with a burial there that we take to be King Chactoquichac of Waka. And he was buried with a diadem jewel, as you can see. That is the maize god on the crocodile tree. There's the maw of the crocodile. And just in case you didn't get it, there's a second pendant depending from his chest, which is the head of the crocodile. So this is the crocodile tree. It's also the world tree. It's laid out in a cruciform form. And as Juan Carlos Melendez has shown in his contextual analysis, this particular individual then is laid out as the world tree of his city. And incidentally, he's got 5 clusters of claws, of jaguar claws, and of chips of obsidian and flint around him. And these form elements of his name, Ichak Kak, Chak Tok Ichak. He's the Tok Ichak part of that. We are proposing in a publication in honor of Kent Riley that above his head is a mirror, which we have, but the mirror is completely encrusted in jewels, divining tokens of jade and spondylus, but many other jewels, and that this represents the bird, the feathered mirror. This feathered mirror is adjacent to a mosaic mask, and as Carl Taube has pointed out, these masks can actually come out of the mirrors. So we have these elements above the head next to the tree in burial 37, which dates to the middle of the 6th century AD at El Peru Waka. So to summarize a little bit more of David Stewart's argument, the great bird on the tree receives sacrifices. It comes down and sits on the paper tree. The sacrifices include this tripod idea with animals on it, fish and a bird and a deer. These tripods have very distinctive knots across them. These sacrificial tripods actually exist artifactually. But as Christoph Helmke and Jesper Niels show, they occur at Lagunitas. They occur with the bird's head on the sacrificial tripod. So the bird is a sacrifice. We know that. And the severed head of the bird is also shown in other imagery here. Heather Hurst, in her reconstruction of the west wall, the east wall, and other elements in collaboration with David and Carl, has shown that this element here, this bird turning into an old man, is dancing on a scaffold here on the east wall, and kneeling before him is a death god. Carl identifies this as a Khan. We won't go into that right now, but the point here is that sacrifice does not result in the obliteration of the bird, but the absorption of the bird into the being. So David's notion that when you put on the paper headdress, the paper band, you become the avatar, you become the messenger of the creator, is represented here in the absorption of the power of that bird as a sacrifice into individuals who represent creators and humans and maize gods, among other things. There are a number of images of dancing birds of this kind. Here are examples from the early classic and the middle classic, of the bird dancing, including one from Teotihuacan. So this is not just a Maya idea, it's actually a Mesoamerican idea. But the birds dancing here are also represented on this plate. This sacrificial plate from burial 24 at Yaxuna shows the conqueror of Yaxuna dancing as the bird, and he is carrying the bundle of royal power that tells you that he is now the living bundle, that he is the incarnation of power represented by the succession of rulers. So to summarize David again, David suggests that the great bird, the avian jester god, lands in the amate tree, source of paper in the name of the jester god, Ush Yokhun, 3-leaf paper. Rulers exceed with a paper headband. That's David Stewart, not me channeling him. But this is the 3-leaf paper band is in David's hypothesis what you see represented iconographically. When you see images like this with the headband being handed to someone, that is the paper band. So the bird as a crown then is shown also in the pre-classic and in the classic period. The severed head of the bird is used as a crown itself. So the person becomes the bird. In the case at hand, the attendant is putting the crown on top of the king, but he is also an incarnation of that bird. Well, moving to Yaxuna, Travis Stanton is running the show there, but in the early Yaxuna project, the Cells Foundation project, we found this ruler dating from the 4th century, late 4th century, buried in majesty inside of a subsurface chamber, which was part of a performance space in which you go into the underworld and then you come out and you're resurrected. So those kinds of performance spaces were repeatedly constructed here. This king, laid out in majesty, has adjacent to his head a real tripod scaffold. That's the tripod scaffold made in manatee bone with a ceramic ring to show you that it was once a scaffold. And it has on it carved the same bow tie that you see on the scaffolds that I have shown you pictures of. So this is a real one. Inside of the bone, I've taken it out of the bone so I could photograph it, was this jade headband jewel. This headband jewel is a variant of the trefoil form. And no, it doesn't look like all the beautiful pictures that you see in the iconography, but it does represent this kind of jester god. And this jewel represents the king as sacrifice adjacent to his body. But also next to the trefoil, the scaffold, the tripod, was this small ceramic head. This small ceramic head represents the severed head of the big bird, of the great bird. You can tell because the eyes are drooping and the tongue is lolling and the tongue is pierced, just in case you don't get the picture. He has pierced his tongue in sacrifice, and he's wearing the beard and he's wearing the trefoil blossom of the bird. This size of head is the size of head that's found on lidded cups in the early classic, which are breath cups in my view. And Stan Gunther and I published on the idea that this particular cup here, which is late classic, belonging to Yakin Chankawil, king of Tikal, and portraying him, is a white soulflower, a white great seed cup. It is an actual lidded cup. But these cups were drinking cups in principle that held the sweet breath of the dead person. So they're a kind of soul container, and the little severed head might have represented that as well. In the groin of that king, he was clasping 3 jades, representing the 3 stones of the hearth of creation. And then underneath those were a little jade that I think represents Itzat, the creator, with the headband and the bird's beak of that being. And then a spondylus jewel representing the tonsured maize god of the early classic with his buck teeth and the trefoil blossom. So he is resurrecting as the maize god, having been sacrificed as the bird. So these guys are doing it by the numbers in the northern lowlands. Don't get the impression that the northern lowlands didn't know about kingship. They certainly did. And Jennifer Taschek also found this form of jade at the site of Zebel Chaltun. So this is not just one-off. This is a kind of jewel that is found in the northern Maya lowlands in the early classic period. And in the pre-classic, she found this bibhead jewel, which is in fact a form of royal jewel in my view, and Jim Garber's and Hamiawe's in the pre-classic period as well. So there are kinds of jewels that don't show up in the epigraphy and iconography that actually are worn by actual people in the archaeological record. So the jester god insignia certainly dates from the middle pre-classic and late pre-classic and goes into the later classic period. And the pre-classic site of Cerros is here given on George Stewart's map of the Maya lowlands. The pre-classic site of Cerros has structure 5C2. I worked at that site. Here's Jaime and Jim coming over to the site to work on structure 5C2. And while I was there, we excavated that site in 1977 and 1978. Jim Garber was the principal director of research at the site, but we all worked on the excavation. This is in 1977. This is me wondering, oh my God, what am I going to do with this building? I went over to the other side of the waters and called George Stewart, but he didn't answer the phone. So I had to go and just do what I had to do. I drew the site. I drew the panels. But in my first year, I got people to draw a one-to-one image of the first panel, which was the lower west panel. So if anybody wants a full-size version of this map done by Maynard Cliff, Dory Rents-Boudet, and Jim Garber, I've got it, and I've got to do something with it. So I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but I have it still. But going back to the site, Linda Sheely and I published on this building quite a lot. Linda first with Mary Miller, and then we did together in many publications. But we were dealing with invisible rulers. We had gods on the sides, and we had places for kings to stand in the middle and on the thresholds, and they did, but we didn't have visible rulers. So what are the rulers doing on these places? Well, Kathy Reese-Taylor did this reconstruction drawing. The king would stand in the middle between these images and perform for everybody, but the kings were self-effacing. What were the kings? Well, in my view, the kings were inside of the bundle house, the dead ones, and my hypothesis is that they stored the dead kings in the southeastern shrine inside the summit building here. And then the new king, when initiated, would go and commune with those dead kings and then circulate out following the path of the sun and present himself on the threshold and then stand in the middle of the masks, representing the pivot of the world and these gods, which were the sun gods on the lower levels and the great bird and his other form of Itzam, old man, on the upper surface. But you would not see the king except as a living being, because what he was a dead person alive, and he would end up in that storage area eventually. So that's the storage area. And the living king wore the paper headband to show that they were resurrected from the dead. And they wore the segments on it to show the bones that were also inside of that bundle when they did it. We all know about the resurrection of the maize god, here represented with the 3 stones of creation on his head. And of course, we discovered one of these, Michelle Rich and her colleagues at the site of El Peru Waka subsequently. But the side ear flare assemblages, in my view, read pictographically to show how, in fact, you go on the bundle path. So the ear flare in the center, as Carl Taube pointed out long ago, reads B or Bay, means path. And then above it, you have a mirror that is bundled by a bundle knot. And above the mirror, you have the feather. There's the mirror and the self. These 3 elements are on the bundles carried on the northern wall of the Pintura shrine at San Bartolo, next to the trefoil and above the mass, the funerary mass. So those are bundled kings being carried into the shrine, which is the creation place, the Flower Mountain in Carl Taube's version. They're being carried in to be stored there. That's where they live. They go in there. And then at the bottom, you have the spondylus shell, which represents the womb of heaven. But here's the trefoil. So you have all of the elements of royal power on the bundle path in this. And the path runs through the underworld, through the maws of the great centipede in the east and the west, as represented in a lot of archaeological and epigraphic work. David Stewart's written on this as well. I do think these ear flares can also represent flowers. White soul flowers, as Stan pointed out to me long ago, they don't have to be white and they don't have to be flowers, but they are containers of some kind. But these particular jade ear flares of Lady Tsuknik, presented to her grandfather at Rio Azul, they are white soul flower cash vessels. They say so. So that's what they are. They're named. So I think that flower is another idea inside of this. Now, Mary Jane Acuna, in her dissertation in 2013, excavated a bundle house. It was the first one I was really aware of. It was a late pre-classic bundle house. And the front of the building had on it a turtle head. And this turtle head was placed so that you come out of the bundle house carrying your bundle, because you were communing with all the dead kings inside, and you'd represent yourself as the resurrected bundled person coming out of this building. That kind of turtle, incidentally, is on the bottom chin masks of the Cerros structure as well. So you have the turtle on that building as well. The turtle, of course, representing the belt stars of Orion and representing the resurrection place of the Maya, also on the west wall at San Bartolo. So this is the muraling on the bundle house. And Mary Jane Acuna wrote about this. She trained with David, and then she came and trained with me, but she was an iconographer. And here is what it says it is. It says that it's the bundle house. It has the trefoil diadem on the headband in the top. It has the mask of the bundle in the middle. It has the bundled mirror on it. It has the 3 leaves of the 3-leaf paper, and then it has the bundle below it. So this is a building that is named 3-leaf paper bundle, and it's a royal bundle house in the late pre-classic period, in my hypothesis. Now, Kathy Rees-Taylor wrote her dissertation on the monumental architecture at Cerros in the second project, and she saw this house, the eightfold house of accession, as the building that superseded structure 5C2. This is the second bundle house. On the summit of that building, it had perishable superstructure, we found cache 1. This is why I'm very happy in April of 1975, looking at this. This was the offering. It represented a great bucket, which is a flower. It was represented a series of 4 cups around it with square plates below them and round circles above them, representing cosmic elements. And these are effigy bundles. In my hypothesis, these drinking cups, which we call beer mugs because they are weighted on the bottom and therefore you couldn't knock them over when you're drunk, these cups are actually effigy bundles. So you drink God out of these bundles. The maize god, of course, made out of maize brew. Deborah Walker, the principal investigator of the second Cerros project, has studied these caches very closely. These are the vessels from that cache, the 4 of them with their lids on the top, not the plates below them, but with the flower-shaped bucket next to them. So my hypothesis is that most dead Maya kings were buried in bundle houses. They were not buried in tombs to begin with. Some of them were buried in tombs, obviously, but nothing to account for the number of kings. We have more than 27 kings at El Peru Waka. We don't have that many royal tombs. We just don't have them. Maybe we'll get a few more, but nobody has enough tombs. The reason being that these are mostly bundled. And when we find them in the ground, as they did at Tikal and other places, we find traces of the bundles, which we've also found at El Peru Waka. So we find that they were bundled. They're sometimes displayed performing, but usually they're buried bundled. All right, so these buckets, this bundled royal cenotaph cache of royal power is a shell mirror place. So it's a mirror bowl, and it has spondylus shells. These are the elements I showed you on the path of the bundle. And then underneath it are the royal jewels. It has at the center of the offering a complete ear flare assemblage to show that it's flower related in my view. And then underneath it, you have the images of the maize god in the center, the tabbed maize god, and you have these jewels around it that are distinctively late pre-classic forms of royal jewels. They're not classic period, they're pre-classic. Jim Garber has written about these. He published the monograph that included a long discussion of them, but he's published extensively on these, and we'll talk about them again. But in his study, these are the jewels from Cerros and from Nochmol, and they show the set that they're there. And so he pointed out that the first set here, these sagittal crested, what I call monkey skulls, are severed death heads, and they have the large eye in the central crest of the monkey skull. They have tabbed gods that are maize gods with the trefoil, and then in the middle they have liminal deities in his view. I'll give more precise understanding in my think. But the important point for Jim was that these bib heads are not just pre-classic. In fact, you find bib heads not only all over the Maya world in the pre-classic, but they go into the classic. So here is a maize god trefoil bib head from the classic period from Palenque. And they exist in other sites as well. So the bib head idea didn't just go away. In fact, it continued into the royal insignia jewels of the classic period. At the site of Blackman Eddy, he found one of these, he and Cat Brown, when Jaime Awe gave them permission to excavate structure B1 all the way down to the ground. Cat Brown wrote about this in her master's thesis and in other publications. And they go back to the middle pre-classic, and they have the inline triad, which represents the turtle, the belt stars of Orion. So we're back to that idea. But in this late pre-classic form of the facade, they found this head in a bucket. And the bucket's very clear with it would have had 3 dots. It has the armature of the great bird, the big armature, not the avelo bar. And this is that armature shown on a preserved principal bird deity at the side of Cerros on structure 5C with the 3 dots underneath it. So it's the same guy. But Jim showed that this occurs even at Tikal. So here is the big bird at Tikal as a bib head in the classic period. And George Stewart gave this photograph of the Cohen Leach pyramid, and the summit of that has a tripod, and on the tripod is a bowl, and on the bowl is a skeletal sun head that it's busted, but it had the beak. Above it has the bundle, which is the trefoil version of the Hunal or the jester god. So this sort of idea is everywhere in my view. Jim showed it was in the iconography, even over in the La Mujeres, but it's all over the place. And he said that this was an important idea, that there was a bowl associated with these insignias. And he said, this is like the bowl at the Tetitla mural that Carl Taube has talked about. And Carl Taube talked about this as a mirror bowl, very distinctively. And he showed this Kamanal Huyu, early classic version of the mirror bowl with the goddess inside of it. And there you can see the mirror has feathers around it, and it has the 3 dots in the middle of it, and it's a profile bowl. And that's the tomb in which that particular individual was discovered. But the mirror bowl shows up at Washaktun in the late pre-classic. In this image, a mask, a bundle mask, is wearing the mirror bowl. And the mirror is a buckle mask over the mouth, which also occurs in the middle pre-classic at Chiapa de Corzo, inside of a royal tomb there. And altar 5, as Kent Riley knows, this represents a ruler coming out of the mirror bowl carrying his spirit companion that he's going to activate. So the mirror bowl is an idea that's back to the pre-classic and continues through the classic period in highland Mexico at Teotihuacan and in the Maya world. So this cash bucket is a mirror bowl. It has mirrors made out of volcanic hematite on mother of pearl backings, and the mirrors overlay the royal jewels. The 4 diadem jewels that are inside of here, in my reading of it, are surrounding the tabbed maize god in the center. This large boulder sculpture was found by Juan Carlos Perez and Griselda Perez in burial 80 at El Peru Waka around 330 AD, but you can see the one in the middle there. And so again, Jim and Jaime sing that's a severed death head with the enlarged eye, and that is the maize god with the trefoil, and in the middle are a liminal state. But I'm going to say, okay, this butterfly-eyed creature is actually a monkey head, and the monkey skull occurs on the alligator tree that I showed you before. This particular jewel is different. It has a kind of asymmetrical element over on its side, like a little bun, but it's actually a shell. And what this doing is this is showing the face coming out of the shell, and the face is the old god as mom, a variant on the old god creator. So this is the old god, the god who is the creator, who starts things off in my hypothesis. So if I'm right about that, then you start with the old god, he is the creator. You go to the trefoil jester god, who can also be Ush Yop Hun, a three-leaf paper. You go to the tabbed maize god, and you go to the severed head because he dies, and then he's resurrected. In the case at hand, he's still in liminal space because half of his jaw isn't there. They cut off half his jaw to show he's just coming back into life. So Jaime and Jim talk about the model that I'm talking about here at the site of Cajobech, and they propose that this whole set of ideas goes back to the middle pre-classic in the Maya world in Belize. But that's their story, and I'll let them tell it. Back at the site of Yaxuna, in the classic period, the site is attacked and conquered by allies of Teotihuacan during the Entrada era at the end of the 4th century. And in the context of that, the family of the ruler, in my view, I can't prove this, but the entourage of the ruler is sacrificed in the major performance. And the queen is sacrificed. Here is the queen shown with a segmented crown next to her, because I couldn't find the photograph that showed the crown on the head, which it actually was, until after we published this book in 2017. But I found this crown. This is the queen's segmented white shell crown with jade jewel, trefoil jewel in the middle. And that's the crown, the same crown on her head. That's the crown. That's the crown on her skull. It's the only time a crown has actually been found on a ruler. And because it's made out of shell, it preserved. So this is a segmented crown with a trefoil jewel in the middle. The goddess was buried next to her. This is a Maya artist showing the Teotihuacan great goddess. They're the great goddesses from Teotihuacan from the early classic period. So this became a temple to the great goddess, and this woman was transformed from being a Maya queen into being an avatar of the goddess. The king was partially burnt to death and then bundled, and then his head was taken as a sacrifice and placed in a plate. And that plate is the plate that has the conqueror dancing as the great bird carrying the bundle. The crown of the king was burnt, the segmented crown, and this is one of his name jewels, because as David Stewart points out in his paper, the name jewels could be conflated with the jester god. And so these are examples of name jewels. There are other name jewels. The conqueror had a name jewel placed under the place that he would exceed on the summit of the same building in which he buried all of these people in Tableau Macabre. That's his face jewel. And that's his face and profile. I propose they're the same person, and that he had his name jewel as the resurrected maize god placed below the place where he would become the resurrected king. The jewels of the old family that were conquered were placed in a black painted jar in another offering on the summit, and then they were axed with a personified axe to show they'd been conquered. They included a Charlie Chaplin jewel, which is another form, the monkey jewels, and a trefoil. The trefoil was so worn that they'd etched the eyes open on it so it could see. But they were not the only jewels. There is another jewel over here, which is in fact an owl mirror jewel. Charles Suler excavated this, offering the whole building in question. The tableau macabre was excavated by our bioarchaeologist, but he excavated the first tomb I talked about. This is the axe that killed those jewels, smashed down into the body, into it. The jewels were the collar jewels, the hair jewels, the ear flare jewels, and the diadems that went around the head. And the flower jewels were in the center because this was a soul flower cash vessel. There's the owl jewel again, which is distinctive. The owl jewel, in fact, is found at Tikal. It's found on the Marcador. It's found in the feathered mirror effigy. And it is drawn here by David Stewart in several forms. And it represents Spear Thrower Owl, who was the king of Teotihuacan, for whom Siak worked during the Entrada era. That particular jewel then, in my hypothesis, represents the proposition that Yaxuna was conquered under the auspices of King Spear Thrower Owl. Yes?
Yeah, more or less 5 minutes.
Oh, okay. Speed up. So at El Waka, we had many royal tombs as well, and we found another of these segmented crowns. This one with a name jewel, and the name jewel is Pasote, Chik Ahau. Chik Nab is a name at Calakmul. Calakmul has a 4th century, 5th century king who is wearing a shell diadem on his head. And we have a shell diadem crown at Chak Tokichak's tomb, tomb 19 at Tikal. And other shell diadems were found in the classic period at Waka. These are the monkey scribes in shell. The jewels that were worn by the king and queen in this figurine assemblage, one represents the wheat's water snake on the head of the king, and a mosaic mask represents an effigy on Queen Kabel. She wore this jewel in Stela 11, and she had it as a mosaic crown, a jewel in her headdress in Burial 61. And Juan Carlos Melendez is studying the mosaic jades, which are insignia jewels of the classic period as well. We found late classic jewels in another tomb, which did not have a mirror, but these jewels, this one was placed in the tomb after it had been re-entered. It was carved north of us at La Corona, about 30 kilometers north of us in the 8th century. Olivia Navarro Farr and Griselda Perez excavated Burial 61, which was found by Juan Carlos Perez in tunneling in the great city temple. These represent jewels and images of Queen Kabel. That's her name jewel as a jade. That's her face on her figurine. And that's her face on a stucco image that was taken and turned into a shrine votive offering on the main temple long after her death. Thank you all very much. I appreciate your attention.
You had 3 more minutes, but that's okay.
I had 3 minutes, sorry.
Okay. No, you're good, you're good. All right, so let's see. Okay, so stop sharing the screen. All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, David, for this very interesting journey through royal imagery and gesture god imagery. This was great. Through time, too, projects across 3 countries, Belize, Yucatan, Mexico, and Petén, Guatemala. So now, if you have questions, is the right moment to ask them on our Q&A function at the bottom. It's the preferred way, or you can also write them on the chat, but please use the Q&A if possible. So there is one question from Hyungtae Young, who's asking, did you ever consider the possibility of an epiomic ruler of Tres Zapotes steles for an example of these jewels, I imagine?
I have not studied the iconography of Tres Zapotes closely. So it could well be that there are important examples of the kind of materials we're talking about. But I think it's pretty clear that there's long-term continuity as well as change in royal iconography, headband iconography, and jewel iconography from the middle pre-classic through the classic period.
Thank you. Okay, we have a question from Erica Raven. Can the figure of El Peru, I guess, burial 61, be a portrait of Ishkabel? Isn't that grave earlier?
Okay, the figure in burial 61 is a portrait jade. It is a small jade. I've just flashed past it, but it's a very beautiful small jade, and certainly.
Do you want to show it?
Yeah, we could show it if you can, but it's the second to last.
This?
Yeah, next jade. Yeah, because it's there.
Okay.
So that jade is certainly the appropriate size to be a crown diadem, and it is a portrait jade. And it was probably used for another purpose, because originally it's very large. It's about the size of a big marble. It was pierced for a large object to go through it vertically. And then subsequently was turned into a head diadem, and they put little sealing jade plates inside the top and the bottom. So my hypothesis, as a speculation, is that this was actually designed as the handle piece for her stylus, for her writing stylus. And then it was turned into a diadem jewel for purposes of wearing on the body. It was not found on the head. Her mosaic mask was found on her head. This jade was actually found on her body, on her torso.
Thank you, David. And thank
slide, Erica, is in fact, we think, is a portrait of Lady Cabell as a young woman, because the tomb dates to the middle of the 7th century, and she died between 702 and 711. So she was young at the time this portrait was made. What we know for sure is the chemistry of the pottery is the same recipe as royal ceramics from the site of Calakmul. So we believe then that that figurine was made at Calakmul, along with other figurines in that funerary assemblage, and they were brought by Lady Cabell as a young woman to marry the young new king of El Peru, Waka, who was a vassal of her father, King Yuknom Chen the Great, or Yuknom the Great, who had her as a favored child and put her in power at Waka to serve his interests during the wars of conquest of the 7th century.
Thank you. Okay, so she says, thank you, great explanation. Mark Venstone says, wow, thanks for an inspiring tour. The Hunal jade diadems always seem to be thin, two-dimensional, like an hacha or an axe. Do you think there might be a relationship between the two in some iconographical way?
Well, I think that the profile jades that are the most best known of the Hunal jewels that we're talking about, including the ones that David Stewart talks about in his article, that these are in fact probably worn as often in profile as they were projecting out, because The one from La Corona, for example, I showed a picture of, is paper thin. It's in a beautifully carved stone, but it could not have been worn, in my view, as a projecting stone. It would have had to have been worn as a profile, which is fine. But if you wear it as a profile, of course, if you wear it in a jade encrusted mask, it has value in being relatively thin and going into mosaic and not being heavy, because jade jewelry was very heavy and would have caused people considerable effort to wear. Queen Cabell's musculature in her shoulders and her skull was very, very robust because she wore a lot of jewelry during her lifetime.
That's the hard life, right? When you get all this muscle to wear all this jewelry.
Yes.
All right, I can't relate with that. Okay, we have time for a couple more questions. If anyone wants to throw one more or two more your way, let's see. Oh, okay, yes, a question from the, of course, okay. Yes, that's right. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm so used to the conference on being on Zoom that I forget that there's actual people in the audience. We actually have 16 people in the audience. Well, yes, Sarah Vanos, what would you like to ask?
Thanks for a great talk, David. I'm sorry we missed a little bit, but I'm so glad to have seen most of it. I actually was wondering, so you talked a lot about like bundling and kingship bundles, right?
Yes.
I'm wondering if you could tease out for me the kind of a hypothesis on whether or not people were considering these kings to be kind of reincarnations in that kind of understanding of these kings. You were talking about it kind of as if they were both different people and the same people, but we know we have a lot of names. Could you just like tease out that kind of topic for me a little bit?
Well, first of all, iconographically, I think there are stelae at Tikal, for example, that are very elaborate in the early classic period that show rulers holding bundles, and they have skulls and bones coming out of the bundles, both male and female. So I think there's pretty good evidence. I mean, I'm willing to go toe to toe with people on this. There's evidence that what they're holding are cloth bundles or paper bundles, and we can't tell which material, but in principle, they're cloth bundles or paper bundles, and they have bones inside them. So that's one thing. In terms of succession, I've proposed that pre-classic kingship was not dynastic, and that epigraphic evidence that back projects into the pre-classic is back projection, and it's not actual, that the first real king is Yasheb Shok in burial 85 at Tikal. And that's the first one we really know. And there are other kings in that period that are probably bodies, but not very many. And the reason we don't have kings in the pre-classic is because they're bundles. And so they're not being buried. They're being probably burnt eventually. But in that case, we don't have succession in line. But in dynasty, you have succession in line. And so you have the repeated use of rulers' names in some cases, very definitely at Tikal and certainly at other sites as well. We have succession of kings who take names, royal regnal names, that are used by earlier kings. Kinich Balam of Waka was a name that, as Stanley showed in his publications on the subject, there was a Kinich Balam in the early classic period, and then a Kinich Balam in the later classic. We were cautious about that, but we haven't found anybody in between yet. So far, we just think there are only two, and that the second king is deliberately named after the first one because of his historical connection to Tikal's conquest by kings. That's the hypothesis. But kings clearly incarnated aspects of earlier kings. We see this in their fathers floating in the heavens above us and other kinds of connections. So we know that in dynasty, people are making some point of the kings being in lines of other people. And so the names are repeated sometimes. But in the cases of the northern lowlands, where we don't have dynasty, in my view, very much really, and other parts of the Maya world where dynasty is really underplayed, we don't know just how they thought about this connection between ancestors and progeny. But generally, ethnographically, Maya tend to see a connection between the grandparent generation and the grandchild generation, and the sharing of names or the connections between these are very much associated in the minds of many Maya people with reincarnation of soul force. So I think it's probably an idea that was there in the record, but if we don't have hieroglyphic information, you can't really pursue that very easily, except through heirlooms. I mean, there are heirloom objects that go forward, and those actually probably represent transfer of power from an earlier era to a contemporary one.
Thank you, Sarah. We have time for one last question, and then we're going to have to say goodbye. Marilyn Masson says, bravo, David. Tremendous. The bundle argument is spot on, even for non-royal Maya graves through time, all those partial burials. And then we have a question from Annabelle Rodriguez, who's asking, if you could please elaborate a little bit on the iconography of the profile jewels, such as the one from La Corona.
Oh my goodness. Well, this is really other people's purview, yours and other archaeologists.
Let's see if we can share the screen and return to that.
The La Corona royal jewels, the one I showed a picture of here, are truly,
where was it?
That one there is just beautiful. It's finished. Notice, I'll just say this, notice that the one from Waka found in burial 8, which is a 6th century tomb, but re-entered in the 8th century. So this is an 8th century jewel placed in a 6th century tomb of a queen, an important individual. But that jewel is really unfinished. You see the one from La Corona, it's completely polished down. All the curves are beautiful. It's very thin, which is why it's broken. But the one from Waka was not finished so carefully. But Juan Carlos Melendez is working on the crafting of these jewels. And he's pretty much convinced that the jewel from Waka shows the kind of trademarks in crafting that would suggest that it was also made at La Corona. Why would that be? Because the queen in question, whom we believe is a queen named Ikum Sakwais, this queen was, in our view, from the north, probably from La Corona. Her husband, Chak Toki Chak, in the same contemporary era, we know that was her husband because she celebrates his continued conjuring of the gods after he's been killed in 556, and she raises a stela for him in 564, 2 years after the conquest of Tikal, by her overlord, who is named Kaktichich, as identified by Stanley Gunter. That king conquered Tikal, and she was celebrating after his conquest and murder of the man who murdered her husband. She was celebrating this, and she was having her husband do the conjuring as a spirit in a very beautiful, elegant, grammatically contrived fashion on the first part of the statement. So this queen was really important to both Waka and, in my view, to La Corona. This king, Chak Toki Chak, shows up at La Corona in his reign, and he conjures the gods of that city. So he conjures the gods of Waka because he's a mirror conjurer. He has mirrors, and because he shows mirrors coming out of his bundle. He conjures the gods of La Corona, which is his wife's place, in my view. And he does so there because he's on pilgrimage to a place we don't know where it is. Maybe Stan can tell me where he's going on pilgrimage, but I don't know yet. But that queen then receives a jewel from La Corona when they reopen the tomb. And it's really important to both La Corona and Waka, in my view, that they've reopened the tomb, which is in the throne room at Waka, and they give her that jewel and put that jewel in there as tribute from her natal home, in my hypothesis.
And then maybe one last question, and we will end there. This one is a quick one. Lee is asking, or maybe it's Huxim, is asking, the small holes are in almost exactly the same position. Is this because of practical considerations or attaching the jewel, or has the position of the holes a ritual meaning?
Oh, good question. I mean, I don't know that we could actually distinguish
Mhm.
that, except to say this, that there are jewels in the Maya record, the corpus, that are pierced for suspension in multiple ways.
Mhm.
So those jewels evidently had the capacity to be arranged in different ways. And that would be ritual practice. That wasn't just practical, that they had two different ways to do it. When there's only one way to do it, it's hard to say that it's ritual, except to say that in the early period, in the pre-classic and Olmec inspired jewelry, they pierce the edges of the mouth. They put drill cores in the mouth, and those are ritual. They open the mouth, one would think, but they aren't there to pierce the jewel. They're there to open the mouth. So drilling the jewel actually does have significance.
Thank you so much, David. Maybe let's give him a hand of
Thank
applause.
you.
Thank you, everyone. It's been a pleasure to have live people and people on Zoom. I think we had up to about 70 people today, so that was pretty awesome on Zoom. Thank you very much. And now we're hungry, so we're going to go eat here. I hope you can eat at home as well. And we will see everyone tomorrow. We'll be here probably at 3:45 Eastern time to kick things off. And the first talk will be by Kathy Reese-Taylor, Deborah Walker, and Felix Kupra at 4. And then we will keep going until 8 once again. All right. Thank you so much. And thank you, Kent, as well for your introduction. And all right. Well, this is the end of day 1 of Maya at the Lago 2022. And Matt says thank you as well. All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.